So now I want to create my register view so we can actually use our API to send post request to and actually create a user in our database. So once we actually have that, we'll just test things out with Postman and send some post request. So let's go into our views.py, and I first want to get rid of routes here. So this was good for just showing you what's going on here, but I can get rid of this now. And with that, I want to get rid of the URL path. So we'll save this and let's go ahead and create that view just above our get profile view. So we'll create this right here. We'll create it as a function based view, and this is going to be called register user, and we'll pass in request. And for the return, we are just going to use response, and I will just return a string for now, and then we will actually serialize some data and return a user. So we'll just say data, and then in here what we want to do first is we want to actually wrap a decorator around this view. So I'm just going to take this API view decorator, and we are going to use a post request. So this view can only take post request. So we just want to add that there. And for the logic itself, I want to be able to first pull out the data. So we'll just use request.data. And once we get that data, we are going to create our user here. Okay. So user is going to be created using the create method. So user.objects.create, and inside of create we are going to pass in all the parameters we need, and then that user is going to be stored in this variable, which will then be serialized and returned to the front end. So let's go ahead and actually pull this data. So first name, this is going to be the actual name of the user. So we are not going to set a last name. We don't have the name attribute in our user model. So we'll just store everything in first name. So you can do this however you want. But I like the idea of just having one parameter for that. And in here we can just pass in name. So this is dictionary. So we can access the values here from request.data. And for the username, I want to use an email. So I don't like the idea of making a user create an email and a password, or an email and a username. So we are just going to use this email value, and then later on we are going to make it to where a username will always be the email provided. So for the email attribute, we are going to use the same thing. So we'll pass in data dot email, and for the password we have to do something a little bit different here. So a password can't be stored in its raw form. So we have to first hash this password before we save it. So for this we are going to use a function that we are going to import. We are going to hash that password, and then we can save it. So we have just going to do from django.contrib.auth.hashers, and we are going to import the so import the function called make underscore password. So this function right here will take in the password that we pass in, and it's going to hash it, and then we'll actually be able to say that. So we are going to pass in the password from the front end. So make password, we are going to take that password, and then we are going to go ahead and create the user, and now we can return it. So we are just going to create the serializer. So serializer, we spell that word wrong. So for this, what we want to do is we want to use the user serializer with a token. So when we register a user, we want to return the token right away. So that's why we created that serializer. So we are going to use user serializer with token will pass in the user, and many is going to be set to false because we are returning one user object, not multiple. So for our response, we can pass in serializer dot data, and let's go ahead and create the view or the URL. So we are going to make that path just under our login. So we'll create the path, and this is going to be API forward slash users forward slash register. And for the actual view, we are just going to set views dot register user. And for the name, we are just going to make this register. Okay. So we have our view, we have our URL. Let's see what's going on here. Looks like we have some kind of misspelled here, something. Let's see, invalid syntax. So users profile. Oh, I need to add a comma here. That should do it. Okay. So okay, so everything is working fine. And let's go ahead and test this now. So remember, we need a post request. So in Postman, what I going to do is create another request. So we'll just do add request, and this is going to be a post request, and we are going to API forward slash users forward slash register. So I will say this, and with our post request, we are going to make this or change the request method. So to post right here, and I want that variable for our URLs or for the base URL, and that needs to be all capital. And I guess I had caps on, so let's just do URL. Okay, otherwise we go and let's pass in the URL here, the API users and registers. Okay, so what we need to do to actually send a post request is we need to go to body, and we can go to form data. So we are going to pass in the key value pairs just like we would in a normal post request, and we need to send the same name, email, and password. So once we send it, then this will take care of actually creating that data if that's a post request. So let's create the name. I'll just say John Doe here. John, and we'll do first and last name. So John Doe, and then the email is going to be john at gmail.com. Okay. And for the password, I will just create some kind of generic password. I will just do zone 1 2 3 4 5. Let's see if Django lets me do this, allow it Django or not. So we have our past post request. I'm going to save all of this, and then I can hit send. And it looks like we have another issue. So you called URL post, and it needs to end in a forward slash in our request. So we'll add that. We'll save this again, and let's try that. So there we go. We just added John to our database. So we have our third item with the ID of 3. So if we go to users and we will pass in the admin user information. So if we hit send here or the bearer token, now we have our 3 items. So we have John, Dennis, and Tim. So if I go back into register, I actually want to print out what request data gives us. So I want to be able to see this. We'll just do print out and then we will do data, and I want you to see the actual object. So for those of you guys that are a little bit newer and don't understand what's happening, so let's go back into register and I'm going to send in one more user. So we'll go into body and we'll do John Doe 1, John 1, and then password could be the same. So if I send this data, we create another user. So we serialize that object and we got back this token. So I want to show you that token. So remember when we use that custom serializer, we get this token and this is how we are going to log in a user right away in the front end. So this is going to become very important later. But we go to this console here. So if I open up my terminal here, we can see data is this query. Okay. So dict right here. So this object. So we get the query dict and then we get back name, email, password, and then we pass this data in, and that's how we actually create the user. So I want to close this section out by creating my own custom error handler. So right now, if we try to create a user with an email or a username that already exists, we are going to get back an error because it can't create an object with a unique key like that. So what I am going to do is create my own error handler so we can actually show this message in the front end when this error occurs. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and make a quick import. So just under our make password function, we are going to do from rest underscore framework, and we are going to import status. So before we actually use this, let me go ahead and just copy this into my browser. So I want to look this up and make sure that we can pull up the documentation here. So we are going to pull up status codes and I'm going to show you how to create that custom message. So we have all of our different status codes and you can see that we can create the code that we want to apply the message to. Then we can actually write that message, and in the front end, this is what the user is going to see depending on how we configure this. So we are going to use these status codes and I'm going to use 400 battery request, bad request that. So if we get an error, it's going to be a bad request. So we are going to use this code and output that message. So back in our register view, let's go ahead and just in here, what I'm going to do is write a try. Try and accept here. So I will do try. And if everything works, that means the user was created. We can return all of this. Now we get back an error. We don't want to serialize and return that error. We want to return back this error message. So we'll just do accept, and in here we will first write the message. Let's just do message like that, and then we'll just put this into a dictionary, and in here I just want to put this into detail. So we are going to pull the message out in the front end by getting detail, and we are going to say user with this email already exists. So this is the message that's going to come out if we get the error now to actually return this message. And we need to do return, and we are going to pass this in our traditional response here. So we are going to throw in that response, and inside of response we are going to pass in the message, and we are going to pass in the status code. So we are just going to do status, and this is going to be equal to status. So that import that we created, or the import that we created. So this is in the status, and this is going to be http _ 400 _ bed. That's all caps, so bad _ request, all capital letter. So if a user with the email already exists, then we are going to get this status code right here with this message, and then we can actually output that in a message in the front end. So let me make sure everything's working right. Okay, so my server is on, and now in my front end I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to go back to our post request, and in body we already have a user with the email of John Doyle, that john@email.com one. So if I send this again, here is our custom status code. So email with this user already exists inside of dictionary, and that's all I want to do to close this out. So in the next section, we are actually going to make it to where a user is permanently going to log in with an email. So we are still not going to customize the user model. I'm just going to create a single signal here. Okay, so whenever a user registers, that username or that email will automatically become the username, and that's how it's going to be saved. So we can just override that method.